Hilchos Issurei Mizbeach Perek Sheni, the laws of those animals that are forbidden to be sacrificed on the altar, chapter 2. Yesterday the Rambam defined the general prohibition of offering an animal that has a mum, that has a blemish. Today the Rambam gets into detail to describe what are the specific blemishes that disqualify an animal from being offered. I had a lot of fun preparing this chapter, doing the research, finding all the pictures that I'm going to show you today. And all of the blemishes that we're going to be discussing today are unique to animals. Because just a couple of days ago we had 2 chapters really, where the Rambam talked about blemishes for Kohanim. And over there was a chapter dedicated to blemishes that are shared by both people and animals, and a chapter for blemishes that are unique to people. Today's chapter discusses the blemishes that are unique to animals. So let's get right to it. Halacha Aleph, Kol Hamumin, Hapoislin Ba'adam Ubi Behema. All the blemishes which disqualify both a person, a Kohen, from serving in the temple, and an animal from being disqualified, Chamishim. Those are 50, Ukvar Nimnu, and they've already been enumerated in the last set of laws. When talking about a Kohen, the Rambam gave us a chapter for that, chapter 7. Halacha Beis, V'yeshmu min acherim, miyuchadin b'behema. There are other blemishes that are unique to animals. Ve'enon re'uyin liyis ba'adam, and they're not fit to be on a person. In other words, even if something similar were to appear on a human being, they wouldn't disqualify him from serving in the Beis HaMikdash. Ushleisha ve'esrim heim, others have esrim ushleisha heim. There are 23 blemishes that are unique to animals, ve'elu hein, and they are the following. First of all, im hoya galgal eina, ogul kishal adam. If the pupil of its eye was round like a human eye. So I didn't know this, but looking this up, a fascinating concept, that if you look at the human eye, the black of the eyeball is circular, is round. And there are some animals and birds that have the same property, mostly animals and birds of prey. But domestic animals, which are typically the animals that we deal with when it comes to sacrifices, cows and sheep and goats, they have what's called horizontal split pupils. Until you look close at this, you have no idea. But the black part of their eye is actually a line. It's not a ball. Other animals, I just put it up just to show, have what's called vertical slit pupils. They have a line going upwards. You see it in a lot of cats. But domestic animals will have what's called a horizontal slit. And so if an animal's pupil is round like a human eye, that's actually a blemish. The second one is Eina achas gedola kishal egel, v'hashniya ktana kishal avaz. If an animal has mismatched eyes, one eye is large like a calf, and the second is small like a goose. But if it was the same thing with ears, not with eyes, a big ear and a small ear, even if the second ear was so small, the size of a bean, kosher, that's kosher. Now I talked about big and small eyes. I couldn't find a picture online of an animal with this defect, but if you do some research, you'll see there's an animal there's a squid in the sea. It's called the strawberry squid because it has the appearance of a strawberry. If you see those little dots like the strawberry seeds. And this squid actually has one large eye and one smaller. That's how it's created, to help it look down and also to avoid predators. So if we could apply this concept to a cow or a sheep or a goat, we'd understand this is a big eye and a small eye. Continuing on the eyes, says the Rambam another mum, im yesh beloiven eina, yabeles sheyesh baseir. If in the white of its eye, there's a wart that has hair. I couldn't find this on the white of the eye, but I did find what's called corneal dermoids. Essentially, the tissue which grows hair sometimes ends up in the eye of an animal. This is a picture from 2021. The National Deer Association came across this deer with literally hairy eyeballs. The tissue was misplaced. It ended up in the eye, and the eyeball literally grows hair. This is not exactly what the Rambam is describing. The Rambam is describing a growth in the eye that has hair, but I figured just for fun we'll show that. And what I did find is this concept in a human being. This is a 19-year-old. They came across a very rare type of tumor where there was a growth in his eye. And if you zoom in, you can see that there's literal hair growing from this growth. It's a very, very rare concept in a human being. But just to apply this to an animal to see what we're talking about, imagine if you had an animal with this kind of growth on the white of its eye with hair coming out of the growth, that is a disqualifying blemish. Another blemish would be im nikav ha'oir shebein shnei chaytmeha b'makom hanireh. if the skin between the two nostrils, we call this a septum today, if it gets a hole, it's punctured in a place where you could see it. Of course, the animal's nostrils are very deep. If you get a hole deeper up the nostril, that wouldn't be a defect. But if you get a hole lower down the nostril, where it could be seen, that is considered to be a mum. And therefore, today, which this would be a very, very practical application, many, many bulls are nose ringed. They purposely pierce the inside of the nostril. It helps with driving and leading them. So they make these nose rings. This would literally be a mum. You cannot bring such an animal as a sacrifice because it has a piercing in the lower part of its nostril. And the last one for this halacha is piha doime l'shel chazir. If the mouth of the domestic animal you're bringing for a sacrifice is similar in shape to a pig's mouth. Now this picture I got from the Art Scroll Gemara in Bechiros where it's discussed. And as the commentaries explain it, there's two unique features to the pig's snout. One of them is that the upper edge, or the upper part of the jaw overlaps the lower part, whereas by a regular cow, this is just, they made a picture of a cow with a pig's snout, just to bring out the point. But by a regular cow, it's all aligned. You can run your hand down and it's flat. With a pig, the upper part of the jaw overlaps the lower part of the jaw. Additionally, there's what's called mechudad, pointed. At least one opinion, the Rambam's opinion in interpreting the second feature, that it's pointed upwards. So when we say that the animal having a mouth similar to a pig's snout, that Rambam immediately clarifies, porus, we're talking about the overlapping feature, afal pi she'enei mechudad kishfut. Even if it's not pointed, like a roasting spit would be pointed, doesn't have that second feature, it only has to have one feature. If it has the feature of overlapping, that's considered to be similar to a pig, and it's disqualified on the basis of having this mu. Halacha gimel, chiteha hachitzonis. If the outer chitim, shenikvu or shenifgemu, if they got a puncture or they were notched in. What are chiteha? There's a bit of a debate. The Kesef Mishnah brings that he found in the writings of the Smag that chiteha are the gums. So if we look at this picture, also from the Art Scroll Gemara, we can see that unlike human teeth, which just form one row around the mouth, when it comes to animals, at least the animals that we're dealing with, they have two sets of teeth, what's called the molars in the back, and then there's an empty space, and only in the front of the mouth we have what's called the incisors. 8 of them over here in the front, and then in the back you have 6 on each side, on top and on bottom, so 24 molars. So either chiteha means the gums, and Rambam would be talking about chiteha hachitzonos, the outer gums, the front gums, the gums of the incisors, if they got punctured or they got notched, afal pisha nishar miktsasan, even if part of them remains, oisha nigmu, or they were completely flattened, these are all considered to be blemishes. Im nekru chiteha hapnimiyos, if the inner gums came completely dislodged, completely dislocated, we'll see later about if they got a hole. The Rambam here is talking about they literally got pulled out. That when the animal would open its mouth and it would scream, they would look like as if they're missing. You can see that they're missing. That's a mum. Halacha dalet. Another blemish for an animal. Im nitlu karneha v'zachrusan imahem. If the horns of the animal were removed with their bony cores, v'lenisha mehem klum, and nothing remained. So just to explain this, you have this picture here. An animal's horns have multiple layers. When you see a bull with a horn, so the outer part is actually what the horn is. Inside, you have a bony core, bony area. That's the white over here, that's the bone, and then the red inside is what's called the sinus. So in many cases, when they want to dehorn an animal, they will only dehorn the outer part. And they'll leave this bony thing, and then it will regrow. The Rambam is talking about a case where you took off everything. You raised down the horn, including the zachrus, including the core. So that is a mum. But if a female animal has horns, ksheda, that's kosher. As a matter of fact, even today, some species of female goats and sheep, they have some form of horns. But for the male, it's talking about when you totally remove the horn. That's a mum. If the skin, which covers the reproductive organ of the animal, got damaged, call this a prepuce in today's anatomical language, somewhat similar to a foreskin, and if that got damaged, that's a mum. If the female genitalia on an animal got damaged, that's also a mum. If the tail got damaged on the bone, but not at the joint. So typically an animal's tail, this is a cow, it's supposed to be a cow skeleton, is made up of a bunch of vertebrae that are attached together by joints. So when the Rambam says here, Zanav min ha'etzem, he means if one of the bones, one of the vertebrae got damaged, not one of the joints. If one of the joints got damaged, that could heal. It's not considered to be a mum. In this picture you can see the tail comes down to one bone. What if the final bone split into two? The edge of the tail is now split into two bones. That is a mum. If there's too much space between the vertebrae, here you can see the vertebrae are very much attached. The joints are small. If there was a finger breadths of flesh in between the joints, that's a mum. If the tail was too short, that's a mum also. Ba'ad kama, how short are we talking about? Bigdi chulya achas mum, shtayim kosher, when it's a goat, who typically anyway have short tails. If the goat's tail only has one vertebrae, that's a mum. Once it has two, it's kosher. Ubitle, if it's a sheep, shtei chulyas mum, hoysa shalish kosher. If it only has two vertebrae, that's a mum. Once it has three, it's kosher. Znav hagdi, another mum, is if the tail of a goat was soft and thin, like a pigtail. So just for comparison, you see here's a young goat. The tail, first of all, is short, and it's also a little bit thick and rises upwards. Pigtails, although in this picture it's also rising, but you can see it's much more thin, rounded, and usually it hangs down. So if the goat's tail displayed these features of a pig's tail, that's a mum. In nishbar etzem min azanav, if a bone, one of the tailbones broke, that is a mum, because the tail is considered to be outside of the animal. Avalim nishbar etzem mitzal oisa, but if one of its ribs were broken, kosher, it's still kosher for a sacrifice, because it's not seen. Now, of course, when you talk about the laws of treifa, whether it can be consumed, that's a whole different thing. If certain ribs are broken, that could be a treifa. But Lagabe, with regards to sacrifices, what we're talking about over here, it's not considered a compromising defect if an inner organ is broken. The tail is on the outside. If it's broken, that's disqualified. On the inside, it's okay. Halacha hey, balas chamesh raglayim ein la ela shalosh raglayim. If an animal was born with a defect of having 5 feet or only 3, these are actual live pictures. This calf was born with 5 feet. This cow with 3. So that would be a mum. Im hoisa achas meiraglav v'yadav, if either of its feet or forelegs, parsasa agula keshel chamor, had a round hoof, like that of a donkey. Just for comparison, again, this is another picture from the Archel Gemara. A donkey hoof, you can see, is round. It's not even split. But the main feature that we're focusing on over here is the roundness. Versus a cow or a sheep. Sheep is more pointed, and a cow also a little bit misformed, certainly not round. So if a cow's or a sheep's hoof was round like that of a donkey, afal pisha hizduko prusa, even if it's cracked and it's split, it has split hooves like a kosher animal. But the fact that it's round already disqualifies it. And additionally, says the Rambam, if it wasn't split hoofs, if the foreleg or the back leg was uncloven, like a donkey, even if it has the shape of a cow or a sheep hoof, but it's not split, that's a mum. This is the word kalut. Torah says, v'sherva says, sarua v'kalut. If an ox or a sheep has the wound of kalut, it cannot be brought as a sacrifice. What's kalut? Kalut is unsplit hoofs. If its hoofs were completely flattened They were removed together with their bony core. Like the horns have the bony core inside, hoofs have the same thing. If they were totally taken down, even if a little bit remains next to the flesh, that's also a mum. And that concludes the 23 unique mumim to an animal. It says the Rambam Malachavav, Kol mum mishlesha v'shivim mum ha'mnuyim. B'behema, any of the 73 blemishes that are counted when it comes to an animal, the 50 that are shared between humans and animals, and 23 unique to the animals, they disqualify it from being brought as a sacrifice. And if one of these things happened to an animal that was unblemished after it was already consecrated, as we said yesterday, it should be redeemed and be left to chulin. It's completely unholy. Chutz, with the exception of mizakin v'choyle u'mezuham, an old animal, a sick animal, and a foul-smelling animal. These three are one of the 50 that we had in the last set of laws, the ones that are shared between humans and animals. So these three features, even though it's no longer kosher to be brought as a sacrifice, it doesn't mean it can be redeemed. It has to stay holy. It should be just left alone and pasture until something else happens to it, which is an actual disqualifying defect, and only then it can be redeemed. This is a concept that's going to come up a lot when it comes to sacrifices, that if something doubtful happens to it, or something which doesn't allow it to be redeemed fully or be offered, you leave it to pasture until a definite blemish befalls it, and then it can be redeemed. So here too, it actually has a definite mum, but these three are in a special category that they don't swing all the way back. They cannot be brought as a sacrifice, but they cannot be redeemed. So you wait till another mum happens. Same thing as if you have a holy animal that was consecrated, and then a passing blemish falls onto it. It can't be brought, but it can't be redeemed. It's got to wait till the blemish heals, and then you bring it. We mentioned passing blemishes. What are some examples of passing blemishes? 4. There are 4 passing blemishes that are shared by humans and animals. The Eluhen, and they are Gorav Lach, a moist type of boil, Chazazis She'ena Mitzris, a type of dry boil, not the one that the Egyptians had. That's why it's called Egyptian. Not the Egyptian dry boil, other type of dry boil. And Mayim Sheyerdin Ba'ayin Ve'enon Kvuyin, water that keeps on leaking into the eye, but they're not permanent. Sanvedin She'enon Kvuyin, eye deterioration, that's also not permanent. And the Rambam will soon talk about how we determine whether it's permanent or not. Ches, Yesham Arba Chaloyim Acherim. Besides for these 4 passing blemishes, there are 4 other sicknesses. If one of them is found to be in an animal, we don't bring it, not because it's a defect, but because it doesn't meet the second criteria. Remember yesterday, the very first line of these laws, the Rambam said every korban has to be tmimin umufcharin, complete in physical body, and also choice. So these 4 violate the choice requirement. They're not choice if they have these 4 things. Torah says, the choicest of your promises. Matter of fact, the Torah actually says, mivchar nidreichem. It's a bit of a misquote. The Rabbi once talked about this. But the point is, mivchar, choicest. There has to be choice, and if these aren't choice, they cannot be brought. Ve'elohim, what are the 4? Misha b'leiven eina yabeles she'ein boiser. The Rambam returns to one of the cases I mentioned before, the wart in the eye, but it's a wart in the eye that doesn't have any hair growing in it. Second one would be with the horns, but not fully raised down. They're somewhat raised down, but something remains a little bit close to the flesh. Number 3, if the inner gums got damaged. Before we said to be a mum, they have to be completely uprooted. If they're a little bit damaged, a little bit notched, it's not choice. You don't bring it. If any of these 4 features was on a holy sacrifice animal that was consecrated, then this thing happened to it, you don't bring them, but you also don't redeem them. They have to graze and pasture in the field till another blemish befalls them. Says the Rambam, if you did after the fact bring them as a sacrifice, it seems to me that they've achieved their atonement. Also, if you have a holy animal that a sin was done with it, it was used in bestiality, or it killed a person, and there's only one witness testifying to it, or only the owner testifies to it. It cannot be brought, nor can it be redeemed till another blemish befalls it. If two witnesses see it, then it has to be automatically killed. It's called the Shera Nisko. But here, only one witness, so you can leave it in limbo till it gets another blemish. If an animal had something happen to it, which would make it treif, unfit to eat, there were 70 defects, 70 incidents that could happen to an animal, listed in the Rambam's 5th book, that could cause it to be treif. If any of those 70 things happen to an animal, asura legabe Mizbeach, it's also forbidden to the Mizbeach. Harehu Eimer, as it says in the verse, Hakrivehu na lefechasecha, bring such a thing to your governor. Hayirtzecha o hayisafanecha, tell me, will he want you? Will he accept you with goodwill? Of course not. You wouldn't bring it to your governor, why would you bring it to Hashem? This is in Malachi, the last book of the Tanakh. Hashem is strongly rebuking the Kohanim who were serving in the temple and doing the wrong things. They would bring animals that had blemishes, they would bring stolen animals, all kinds of things. And Hashem says to the Kohanim, you wouldn't bring it to your own governor, why would you bring it to me? So same thing over here. You wouldn't eat it. It's treif for you to eat. So Hashem should eat it. No, if it's treif for you, it's treif for Hashem. But however, in these cases, even though it cannot be brought as a sacrifice, so we don't redeem it either. You cannot redeem a sacrifice if all you can do with it is feed it to the dogs. If you can redeem a sacrifice and eat it, good. But in this case, it's treif. No human's going to eat it. So what's going to happen to it? It's going to be thrown to the dogs. We don't redeem hektish just to feed it to the dogs. Let them pasture in the fields till they die, and then you bury them. What if the animal was slaughtered as a sacrifice and only later something internal was discovered that renders it a treifa? You just burn it. You can't offer it on the Mizbeach as you usually would. If one of the inner organs was found to be missing, even if it's not treif. In the Rambam's 5th book, when he listed the treifas, things that were missing were mostly when it came to the lungs or other things like that. But there are other missing organs that even if they're missing, they're fine. If it only had one kidney or the spleen was removed. So it wouldn't be treifa, but it's forbidden for the Mizbeach, and it should be burned. Not because it has a defect, because any internal defect is not a defect. It's because we don't offer on the Mizbeach anything lacking. Shanemar, as it says, and actually there's 3 verses where it says this, Tmimim yiyu lachem, they should be complete for you. It's not clear which one that Rambam meant, so I put all 3 on the screen, but they're all in last week's parsha when we talked about the sacrifices. Tmimim yiyu lachem, it should be holy for you, it should be complete for you. That means that everything that goes in the Mizbeach has to be fully complete, no missing limbs. V'chol hayeser kecheser, anything that has an extra limb is like a missing limb. Too much is like too little. Therefore, if there was 3 kidneys or 2 spleens, psula, it's disqualified, and you wouldn't bring it on the Mizbeach. Now, before we mentioned that if an animal has water leakage in its eye, but it's not permanent, or deterioration in its eye, and it's not permanent, that's called a mum oiver, a passing blemish. But if it's permanent, then it's an actual defect. So how do you determine, says the Rambam, what is considered to be permanent deterioration? It's an 80-day period where we're sure that the animal didn't see. We check it 3 times, at 3 intervals during the 80-day period. On day 27, after you suspect something is wrong, on day 45, and on day 80. Imra, if at one of those tests he does see, the animal does see, we just keep counting 80 from the last time we know that the seeing stopped. 80 days of not seeing straight is considered to be sanvedim kvuyim, permanent deterioration, and it's a defect. What about water leakage? How do we determine if that's permanent? So here there's a very specific recipe. If the animal eats fresh grass from the beginning of the month of Adar till halfway through the month of Nisan. It's 1.5 months right after the rainy season when all the grass is still fresh. asavim yeveshim elul v'chatzi tishrei. And then 6 months later, at the end of the summer, it eats dry grass. Here's the animal eating fresh grass and dry grass. It eats dry grass through the month of Elul and half of Tishrei. V'loy nisrapa, and after that it wasn't cured. Harei elu mayim kvuyim, the leakage is permanent. So you basically have to feed it. That's the way you determine. Once you see animal has leakage in its eyes, you give it 1.5 months worth of fresh grass in Adar time, 1.5 months worth of fresh grass in the end of the summertime, and see if it heals. And there's a specific amount. How much does it have to eat of these grasses? The fresh ones in the moist season and the dry ones in the dry season. You give it a fig's size, or a little more, before its first meal of all those days through those 3 months. Has to drink it, has to eat it after drinking a little bit. It has to be loose in the field while it's eating, and it shouldn't be alone. As in this picture, it's eating together with another animal for company. If all the boxes were checked, it wasn't alone, it was loose, it drank a little bit, and then it ate this grass before its first meal of the day, and you did it for those 1.5 months here, 1.5 months there, and it wasn't healed, that's for sure permanent. If any of these conditions was missing, as the Rambam will soon delineate, it's a doubt, and you can't bring it, and you can't redeem it either. What would that mean? Missing one of the conditions. Let's say, it ate the 1.5 months worth of fresh grass properly throughout the month of Adar and half of Nisan. And then it ate dry grass also for 1.5 months, but not in the end of the summer season right away. The second half of Nisan and Iyar. Which means that it ate 3 months, but in a row, not with a break. Or it ate the proper size, but it was eaten after the first meal, or before the drinking, or it was tied down, or it was alone, or it was in a garden near a city, not in the field outside, and then it wasn't healed. Now you didn't do the test properly. Now it's all a doubt. Maybe it's permanent, maybe it's passing. Therefore, if a person were to blemish this animal purposely, you couldn't give him lashes. Yesterday we learned you can't make a purposeful blemish in an animal. But this animal might already be blemished. And the Rambam said yesterday that if it's already a blemished animal, the second person doesn't get lashes. So here, it might already be blemished, so you don't get lashes if you do that. The Rambam repeats, if it ate the grass properly, in the proper times, and it didn't get healed, that is an animal with a permanent defect. Now, when you say it's a permanent defect, says the Rambam, yesh badavar safek. There's a doubt now. You did the test. You determined that it definitely has a blemish. But is it considered blemished from today forward or also retroactively? Yesh badavar safek, there's a doubt. If, in the case of testing, is it considered retroactively an animal with a permanent blemish from the time that the blemish first showed up? Or only when you gave up on healing it? Therefore, if somebody were to redeem it before they despaired of healing it, and then he kept the money on the side, the money which he used to redeem it, and after they despaired of healing it, which means now it's discovered to be a definite blemish, now he goes and takes the money and uses it for himself, which is a prohibition called mi'ila, sacrilege, where you misuse consecrated funds. There's a suffix ma'il. You're only considered to be in doubt whether you committed sacrilege. And therefore you will not bring the sacrifice usually associated with sacrilege, as will be explained in its place. The end of this book has a set of laws called Hilchos Mi'ila that Rambam is bringing at the point. This we can't hold you accountable because we don't know. Later on they despaired. Maybe it's only considered a blemish from then on, and the money which you gave before is to redeem a fully holy animal, which is fully holy and not allowed, or if it's considered to be retroactively with a permanent blemish, so what you redeemed was a fully redeemable animal, and there's no problem for you to use the money. Therefore, you're only in doubt, and we can't hold you accountable for that.